What would happen if you removed one of Diablo 2's core components from the game, the gear? How would you survive strong enemy attacks? Would your damage be high enough? And is it even possible to beat the game this way? In this video, I'm going to try and beat Diablo 2 without equipping any gear at all, and I'm taking this challenge all the way to hell if possible. All of my character's gear slots must remain empty at all times. I wanted to push this challenge, so I will try to complete all difficulties from normal to hell. And finally, I will not be modifying the player setting during this challenge. I began by creating a new hero for the challenge. I spawned into the rogues camp, threw away my sword and shield, and headed out into the wilderness. Oh, the exit is over here. The very first enemies of the game are complete pushovers, so even without a sword I was able to clear the early areas of monsters. And it was actually kind of oddly satisfying to punch zombies with my bare fists, but I wondered how long that feeling would last. Well, without a weapon equipped, I was dealing 1 to 2 damage with each punch. As I entered the Den of Evil, I had leveled up to level 2 and put a skill point into Might, which boosted my damage to 1 to 3. Still enough to complete the very first quest of the game, but damage doesn't go much lower than this. After finishing the Den of Evil, I found the burial grounds and attempted to kill Bloodraven. She was a bit too hard for me at the moment though, so I decided to grind some levels and come back later. And after some levels of grinding, I hit level 6, an important milestone because it allowed me to get the Holy Fire aura. That was a big deal, because unlike auras like Might that scale your damage by a percentage, Holy Fire adds flat fire damage to your attacks, and a lot of it too. The aura also deals fire damage to enemies within its range for free, so the new aura gave me a massive boost in power. I went back to Bloodraven, and despite her having regenerated all of her health, I wiped her out with just a few punches. Back in town, I claimed my free mercenary as a quest reward. I bought her a bow with 3 sockets in which I put all of the damage increasing gems that I had found so far. Just because I was stupid enough to face the forces of evil naked doesn't mean a poor mercenary who was just trying to make a living for themselves should suffer. The mercenary was a nice addition, and every additional level into Holy Fire gave me a significant damage increase. So despite not having any gear, for the time being I was cruising. I went and rescued Deckard Cain, and how fast I killed Griswold was really a testament to how good the damage from Holy Fire was. I just had to be mindful about elite monsters' damage output and not get overly confident. I cleared out the Forgotten Tower and defeated the Countess. I often stop and grind the tower for a bit, since the experience is pretty good and the Countess dropped some nice runes for early rune words. But this time I didn't see the point, so instead I pushed on. I did however find my first charm in the tower. I had not considered charms beforehand, so I had to make a decision. Are charms considered equipment or not? Let's see, do you wear them? No. Can you buy them from gear merchants in town? No. Do they take up an equipment slot? Also no. So I concluded that charms are not gear, which meant that I was allowed to use them. I sped through the rest of Act 1 thanks to Holy Fire. I reached the catacombs, and just before going down to Andariel, I hit level 14. That's a bit lower than what I usually am at this point, but I didn't feel like I was behind at all. I had gotten Holy Fire up to level 9, which dealt great damage. Before the Andariel fight, let's do a quick gear check. The silver lining with not using any equipment was that I could pump all of my points into vitality, so I was actually not as squishy as I had imagined. I cleared out most of the enemies around Andariel and then drank a bunch of antidote potions. In case you didn't know, antidote potions not only cure the poison effect, but they also give you a boost to your poison resistance for a short while. But if you chug a bunch of them at once, the duration of the buff actually stacks. But that was hardly necessary, because she's weak to fire damage, so this was the easiest Andariel fight I've had in a while. On to Act 2, where I started off by hiring a new mercenary. Thank you for your services, Alisa. I considered the Blessed Aim aura to boost my chance to hit enemies, but the passive healing from the Prayer aura is just too nice to have in my opinion. I made him the best stick that I could at the moment, and we headed out to take on the second act.
I'll put that to good use.
We started by clearing out the sewers. Even though the skeletons down here are resistant to fire damage, Holy Fire was still destroying every enemy that we encountered. I found the Horadric Cube and immediately went to do some crafting. There is a recipe that I don't see get talked about much that can make a really strong polearm as soon as you get your hands on the cube. The recipe requires a staff, a belt, a kris, and any diamond. The output is a polearm with a Savage modifier. That itself is a very good damage mod for this early in the game, But what really makes this recipe interesting is that the polearm has a chance to spawn as the exceptional version of the weapon, and it can roll with a second stat as well. So you have the potential to roll an exceptional polearm with 70% plus to damage and attack speed or maximum damage as a secondary stat. So for your next playthrough, I recommend you save up all diamonds that you find in Act 1. Now, my mercenary wouldn't be able to use such a weapon at his current level, but I decided to roll polearms with all the diamonds I had found anyway, just so I knew what I had to work with. I didn't know this because I'm usually not this low level at this point, but the Savage stat apparently has a level requirement of 19, so I couldn't use any of the polearms right away. I also unfortunately didn't get any really good secondary stats, but I got 2 that I could use relatively soon and 2 that could serve as upgrades later on as my mercenary leveled up. I found the Staff of Kings in the Maggot Lair, and I found the amulet in the Claw Viper Temple. I leveled up to 18 and unlocked Blessed Hammer. I had planned to respec to a Hammered In, but I was breezing through the game, so I continued as I was. Besides, hammers would surely have mana issues for me at this point, and without even a belt to store mana potions, that seemed like a pain. In the crowded rooms of the tomb areas of Act 2, I was very happy that I decided to stick with Holy Fire for the time being. Very happy. I completed the staff and made my way to the Arcane Sanctuary. I took the wrong way a few times, but I made it through in one piece. I was feeling a bit underleveled, so I decided to clear out a couple of the fake tombs before taking on Duriel. And after a couple of tombs, I hit level 21 and decided I was ready to move on. But first I went back to town to prepare a bit. My damage was amazing, especially the pulsing damage of the aura was way higher than I had expected. But I was hitting enemies just about half of the time, so I decided to change my mercenary to one with Blessed Aim Aura instead. I would have to put more attention towards healing us both with potions, but I would hopefully kill faster if I hit enemies more often as well, thus taking less damage overall. I had also found some additional diamonds, so I decided to craft more polearms. Again, I didn't get anything amazing, and I think I got better ones overall in my last crafting session. I then went to L6 to spend all of my gold on gambling circlets. It is very expensive, but you can get some really amazing helms for the early to mid game this way. You can get magic find, resists, high rolls of life and even plus to skills, but what I was looking for right now was elemental damage. The rolls available are really decent too. Unfortunately, they are not that common, and I didn't manage to gamble any decent helm at all. And finally, I stacked up on some thawing potions, just like I did with antidotes before the Andariel fight. I opened the door to Duriel's chamber, set up a safety TP and chugged some thawing potions.
Thanks.
Duriel was somewhat annoying with his knockback, and because I was so focused on making sure I remembered to buy thawing potions, I forgot to buy regular health potions. But by having me and my mercenary take turns tanking his attacks, I was barely able to defeat him before my health ran out. He dropped a unique Morning Star, which is Blood Rise. Not that it matters since I'm not allowed to use gear anyway, but the attack speed and the boost to attack rating would have been really nice for this character. I usually find the first half of Act 3 to be very annoying, but Holy Fire's pulse damage made the jungle a breeze. I dare say I even enjoyed myself, which is rare for Act 3. The fact that Holy Fire's passive damage one-shot flayers and 2-tapped most of other normal monsters made me feel super powerful. Not being able to wear any gear matters less if enemies can barely reach you before they die. I collected the eye, the brain and the heart without much of a challenge other than navigating the map. After that was the High Council of Travincal though, and they deal a lot of damage and they are quite resistant to fire damage. I carefully snuck around their building to clear out any other monsters before slowly approaching the council, trying to lure them out a few at a time, and that made them much easier to deal with. I still had to run away from their hydras a few times and let them despawn, but I was never that close to danger. I created Kalim's Flail and had to break my no equipment rule for a second to destroy the orb. I guess that technically means that I didn't beat the entire game without any gear, but let's pretend you didn't see that. Next, I made my way through the Durance of Hate. With my defenses being so bad, I was afraid that the exploding dolls would cause me a lot of trouble, but thanks to the passive damage of Holy Fire, I was able to keep my distance from them as they exploded. Sticking with Holy Fire proved to have been a great choice over and over. I bet some of you are shaking your heads at me for being oblivious to the power of Holy Fire, but I have never played a Holy Fire Paladin before. Before long, I made it to Durance level 3 and Mephisto. I was cocky and zoomed in to get a cooler shot for the video, but once my mercenary died, things turned bad quickly, and I had to run back to my TP with my tail between my legs. We eventually came back for round 2, and this time we won decisively. I took a leisurely stroll down the stairs from the Pandemonium Fortress and went out into the wastelands of Act 4. Holy Fire's damage was still holding up, even Isual the tank was fairly quick to take down. But I soon leveled up to level 25 and maxed out the skill, and without gear that was the maximum level the skill was ever going to be. Though I could still squeeze out a little bit more damage by putting points into the synergies. Once I reached the Chaos Sanctuary, things started to become more dangerous. I could no longer carelessly run into packs of monsters and tank them to maximize my damage, and had to play a lot more defensively. I worked my way through the first seal and could eliminate Vizier even though he is fire immune, thanks to my mercenary. On the next seal though, despite trying my best to be careful, both my mercenary and I died to Lord Disease, and I decided that my days as a melee brawler was finally over. It was time to respec to become a Hammerdin, but as I was talking to Akara, I started second guessing myself. Was Hammerdin really the choice? There's no doubt that it's very powerful, but just like my current fiery punchy build, the Hammerdin likes to be up close and personal with the enemies to make the most out of the hammers. And as I was planning to take this challenge beyond normal difficulty if possible, I was probably going to have to prioritize defense sooner or later. So what about Holy Bolt? It only damages demons and undead enemies, but to be honest, that is the majority of enemies in the game, including all bosses. And as for enemies that Holy Bolt can't damage, it can at least heal my mercenary as he takes them down. Additionally, since Holy Bolt isn't boosted by any offensive aura, it frees me up to use a defensive aura like Sanctuary. And as a final bonus, Holy Bolt has a lower mana cost, which might not seem like a big deal, but without the Spirit Rune Word or any other caster gear, I was going to have mana problems. But what do you think? Was it the right call, or would I have been better off with the old reliable, Blessed Hammer? I went back to the Chaos Sanctuary and took my revenge on Lord Disease. Dealing this much damage at range seemed pretty powerful to me. I cleared out the final seal with Infestor of Souls, and for the time being I was quite happy with my respec to Holy Bolt. I found a unique sword, again, not that I could have used it anyway, but the Holy Fire build would have loved this. Next up was the Diablo fight. Thanks to the range of my new build, the fight was pretty easy, but with a small margin of error. I made a mistake and died really fast. But I defeated Diablo eventually and found more unique loot. This unique halberd was not dealing as much damage as my mercenary's current weapon, but maybe the open wounds, prevent monster heal and slows target could be useful later if I needed to debuff some particularly difficult elite monster or an act boss. I also found a nice rare circlet with plus to Paladin combat skills. Thank you game, but I'm not able to accept this gift from you. I went out into the open battlefield of Act 5, looking forward to farming some easy experience against the hordes of enemies in the area. Wait, hold on, are those not demons? Luckily, my merc was still quite strong, but let's take a look at the evidence here. Horns on their heads, spikes on their bodies, imp-like feet. That's a demon if I ever saw one, but I digress. So it turns out that Act 5 has a lot of enemies that look like demons, but actually aren't, so my mercenary basically had to carry me for most of the act. Once I reached the icy cave part of the act and found even more non-demons, I was starting to think that maybe I messed up when I spec'd the Holy Bolt. But there wasn't much I could do about that at this point, so instead I pushed on. My merc could clear everything slowly but surely with the healing from Holy Bolt, but I tried to skip any enemies that I could safely run past. I did take a detour to save Anya though, since the quest reward is so good, especially since I couldn't get any resist from my gear. After that, I rushed to the Ancients, and I made sure to really prepare for the fight by covering a part of the floor in extra potions. I woke them up and tried to split them up. I managed to get 2 of them alone with my mercenary in a good position, so now I just had to make sure to keep him alive. And what an underwhelming fight. What were they even doing? Once the throw barb fell, I joined in with my fist, not for damage, but for the humiliation. After 2 of them were down, we engaged the last one. He did deal a lot of damage with his whirlwinds, but I made sure to keep the healing coming and we ended up defeating the Ancients on the first try. In the end, I only had to use 2 potions in total. The Worldstone Keep offered even more enemies that weren't demons or undead, so I tried sneaking past as many as I could. Oddly enough, the final trial in the Throne of Destruction didn't feel like a challenge, it felt like a relief, since every enemy that Bale summons is either a demon or undead. Not even the final wave really stood any chance. And the final fight against Bale was a similar story. As long as I kept the right distance, I could shoot holy bolts at him rather safely without taking much damage back. My mercenary died about halfway through the fight, so I finished the fight against Bale one-on-one. With a bit of an anticlimactic ending, I had beaten the game on normal difficulty without wearing any gear. Looking for more of a challenge, I went straight into Nightmare. I cleared out the Den of Evil without much trouble. The den mostly contains demons and undead, and the few Yeti monsters were taken care of by my mercenary. After finishing the quest, I was rewarded with another respec. I had thinking about respecing to Blessed Hammer, but I held off for now, and instead I went through the underground passage and all the way to the Black Marsh and the Forgotten Tower. It so happens that the tower contains only demons and undead, and I wanted to farm some mid-level runes for some upgrades for the mercenary. Farming the Countess with Holy Bolt was easy, but rather slow. I don't remember how many runs I did, but I farmed her for almost 2 hours, giving me a decent pile of mid-level runes as well as several more levels of experience. In addition to the runes, I also found a war scythe with 4 sockets. It's not the best choice available at this point in the game, but it was the first pole armor spear with 4 sockets that I had found, so I was happy with it regardless. I cubed 3 unrunes to make a soul rune and made insight in the war scythe. This not only granted me a high level meditation aura for mana regen, but it also has great stats for a damage dealing weapon, even in a mediocre base. I was hoping to be able to make a few more rune words like Smoke, Cure or Bulwark, but I didn't want to spend more time grinding for runes, especially since runes like Lam and Io are quite rare from the Countess in Nightmare. Before moving on, I went back to normal Act 2 and once again exchanged my mercenary back to one with the prayer aura. I didn't need the attack rating boost anymore, and the meditation aura from Insight doubles the healing from his prayer aura, and with the mana regen sorted via the mercenary, I was now free to use the salvation aura at all times for a big boost to our resistances. In the interest of saving some time, I'll keep the story of Nightmare short. I assume seeing me suffer in hell will be more interesting anyway, so I rushed towards Andariel as fast as I could, which to be honest wasn't that fast, since it was still quite dangerous for me to run too far past my mercenary. Holy Bolt was dealing so much damage though, it was almost stupid how good it was. And since Andariel is a demon, she didn't stand for long, and I was even able to line up my mercenary in front of her so that I could heal him and shoot her at the same time, so I managed to keep my mercenary alive for the entire fight, and for me that's a rare outcome. Act 2 was part easy breezy and part tedious grind. Some areas have almost exclusively undead enemies, while others have none. The most annoying area by far was the Maggot Lair. Getting my mercenary to go where I wanted was a real struggle. The second most annoying place was the Arcane Sanctuary, but that's mostly because the summoner was hiding in the last direction that I looked in. Duriel was just another big stupid demon, so he wasn't much of a problem. Bug squashed in the name of the lie. Act 3 wasn't too bad, but I had to grind through it slowly. There was a lot of really fast enemies in this act, and if I ran too far ahead, I risked getting swarmed by too many at once. That was dangerous for me of course, but it also meant that if I had to run away from monsters, I could not heal my mercenary, and for the most part, a constant stream of Holy Bolts was required to keep him alive. But like the previous act, the final boss was not much of an issue. Between Salvation Aura and Holy Bolt, my mercenary stood up to Mephisto like a champ. And if it's rare that my mercenary survives against Andariel, it never happens against Mephisto. Act 4 started with me finally gambling a good circlet. It was a shame it didn't happen sooner, but I couldn't complain. It added a nice bit of elemental damage to my mercenary's attacks and had some good additional stats as well. Act 4 was a treat for this character, because almost all enemies are demons. There was one big exception though. Apparently Isuel isn't a demon. I always assumed that he was for some reason, though thinking about it, I guess he was an angel, and even though he was corrupted, it would be strange if he turned into a demon. In Act 4, I maxed out Fist of Heaven as a synergy to Holy Bolt, which meant that my damage was as high as it was ever going to get. Don't get me wrong, the damage was absolutely great, but I was only in Act 4 Nightmare, so there was still a good chunk of Nightmare and all of Hell left. But that was a worry for later. First I had to defeat Diablo. The Chaos Sanctuary was pretty easy thanks to the narrow corridors allowing me to control the flow of battle. None of the seal bosses or Diablo himself proved to be much of a problem against a high damaging barrage of Holy Bolts. Act 5 was a similar story to how it was in normal, slow but steady progress. I found a unique shark skin belt pretty early on, and while it wouldn't have been any good on this character anyway even if we could wear it, it was nice to find an actual useful item, because overall, drops have been pretty bad for this character to be honest. As in normal, I tried rushing the end of the act as fast as possible, but again took a detour to save Anya for the quest reward. In the Frozen River I found a really nice small charm. Stuff like this might seem like a marginal benefit, but as I couldn't celebrate much else in the way of drops, I was pleased to find a decent upgrade. I was barely able to save Anya before getting clobbered by Yetis. A hidden benefit of doing a gearless challenge is that I didn't really need to retrieve my body if I happened to die. I managed to separate 2 of the Ancients again, and with the healing from Holy Bolt my mercenary could safely whittle away at their health. I got hit pretty bad a few times, but in the end Emilio won the battle on our first try. I had some good fortune in the Wellstone Keep, as most of the random enemy spawns were undead. That meant fast progress, and even the waves in the throne room were not much of an issue either, except they did kill my mercenary a few times. Bale was the same story, he did kill my mercenary, but I didn't even bother reviving him, but instead took him down on my own. Nightmare difficulty without gear completed. Now let's go to Hell for the real challenge. Here's a quick overview of the character as he entered Hell. Everything looked relatively good considering the circumstances, except maybe one thing. I was only level 56, so I decided to go back to Nightmare and farm a few extra levels before beginning my quest through Hell. Extra levels wouldn't be that much of an upgrade for myself, but rather for my mercenary, so that he could be able to tank and hit enemies more reliably. I farmed some terror zones in Nightmare and did Bale in his waves a few times. In addition to experience, I was hoping to find a better base for my mercenary's insight. I had no luck with that though. In fact, I didn't find anything worth noting at all. So at level 65, I grew tired of grinding and decided it was time to tackle Hell. Anything with a range attack was a big threat, but otherwise it was fairly manageable, though my mercenary did need my support to beat even a single regular Yeti monster. I made it all the way to the Forgotten Tower, and just as I did in Nightmare, I stopped and farmed the Countess for a while. Again, it was quite easy thanks to every monster spawning here being either a demon or undead, and the fact that I could use the environment to my advantage. From a random enemy on the way down to the Countess, I found my first Io rune. I had been looking for one of these because it allowed me to make the rune word Bulwark. I was a little sad to lose the elemental damage from the circlet so soon after finding it, but strong physical enemies had already proven to be a big problem for my mercenary, so Bulwark was looking like a nice upgrade. I was also really hoping to find a Lem rune to make a treachery for the mercenary as well, but I had no luck with runes from the Countess herself. So after a while I gave up on that for now and moved on. Instead I went shopping in town for an armor with some sockets in it, and I found a 3-socketed armor with some strength on it. And while that wasn't that great, it would have to do for now. I socketed the armor with a random max damage jewel that I had lying around, as well as 2 soul runes to further help against physical damage. After changing his armor, his resist ended up looking pretty bad, but that was just because my salvation aura didn't affect him while I was standing in town. With some decent upgrades sorted for my mercenary, I went straight for Andariel, making short work of any demons or undead on the way and trying to skip most of the other monsters if I could. And I could really tell that my mercenary tanked physical damage much better now. I made my way through the catacombs without much trouble, because the catacombs contain very few spiders, which are as far as I know the only non-demon, non-undead enemy that can spawn there. The fight against Andariel began with me getting a few cheap shots in, and then my mercenary kept her busy while I blasted her down. I had to use a few full rejuvenation potions on my mercenary, but that was a cheap price to pay. Andariel's drops were extremely disappointing. I was hoping for at least something interesting to identify. In Act 2, I had to slow down quite a bit. There were more ranged enemies, as well as enemies that I couldn't damage with my holy bolts. I got into the habit of scouting ahead with my skills to try and avoid being overrun. Playing like this doesn't come naturally to me though, so I did get impatient from time to time and was often immediately punished for it. The Maggot Lair forced me to be extremely patient though, because its narrow corridors were filled with beetles, which I couldn't damage with Holy Bolt nor with Fist of Heaven. And it was for situations just like this that I skilled a few spare skill points into fanaticism, so I could at least help out with something other than healing. This was a slow grind, and I couldn't stop paying attention either, because then Emilio would die. So I queued up some YouTube videos on my second monitor and started inching my way forward, and judging from my watch history, it took me almost an hour to find the Staff of Kings. The Claw Viper temple was also tough, thanks to the damn snakes, and I mean really tough. But I managed to grab the amulet, assemble the staff and quickly got out of there. All in all, the tomb areas were mostly safe as I could use the doorways to my advantage. And I did abuse every advantage that the environment gave me, because things were getting really difficult now. Neither me or my mercenary could really handle being completely surrounded by enemies anymore, even with the healing from Holy Bolt. Again, Duriel was not much of an issue. I could barely keep my mercenary alive with Holy Bolt spam, and against a single boss there were no other surprises. The way leading up to Duriel was much harder and more tedious. In Act 3, enemies unaffected by my Holy Bolt were starting to become a real problem. Elite enemies took a long time for my mercenary to wear down. For example, getting Kalim's eye from the spider cavern was a major pain. Just take a look at the graveyard of failed attempts at the minimap. The Flayer jungle and the Flayer dungeon was a little bit easier since all Flayers are demons. While trying to find Kalim's brain in the sewers, I suddenly ran out of money to resurrect my mercenary with. This was terrible news, since I couldn't tank anything myself, and I was relying on him to take care of a lot of enemies for me. So after barely getting the heart from the sewers, I had to go back and farm up a new pile of gold to be able to progress further, because my mercenary dying was completely unavoidable. I chose to go back and do the gold farming in the Forgotten Tower. It was an area that I could do very safely, and with some luck I might finally be able to get that Lem rune to drop for my mercenary. I never did find that Lem rune, but I did find a unique ring, and even though I couldn't wear it, identifying rings is always exciting to me. It was just a nagle ring, but with a pretty decent roll on the magic find. After a few runs, during which I made sure to go back to town and sell most valuable loot that dropped, I had collected over 500,000 gold, which was enough for more than 10 resurrections. Encountering some nasty elite enemies could probably make me burn through that pretty quickly though, like the High Council of Travincal, where I was heading next. The High Council is dangerous, but I used my range to my advantage and managed to thin them out from afar. Luckily there weren't any other monsters that spawned inside the temple area, so me and my mercenary could comfortably clean up the rest of the council and then strike the orb. The Durance of Hate was filled with maulers and exploding dolls, so I took it safe and slow by using doorways to my advantage again and trying to scout ahead with Holy Bolt into dark areas. It was a slow grind, but it worked. After working my way through level 1 and 2 and a tough battle against the gatekeepers on level 3, Mephisto was kind of a letdown. He managed to get himself stuck in melee with my mercenary while I could hold down my left mouse button and watch his health bar drain to 0. I was happy to be back in Act 4 because that meant Holy Bolt was back to being almost 100% functional. This was going to be a nice change of pace and I looked forward to some easy progression. That turned out to be quite a bit of overconfidence though, and I was humbled the minute I set my foot outside of town. I made it through the act at a steady pace, but any time I tried to run past enemies it ended very poorly, so I had to take it slow. I did the Hellforge quest hoping for a nice rune to upgrade my mercenary's armor, but unfortunately it was just an eye rune. I reached the Chaos Sanctuary, and believe it or not, this wasn't the first time I took on Hell Diablo without any gear. I did a video a while ago where I tried running the Chaos Sanctuary without any starting gear, so I knew that it was possible, depending on your definition of running that is. But basically, the Chaos Sanctuary is very dangerous, but also very abusable, especially with a long range attack like Holy Bolt. I played it safe, and none of the seal bosses gave me any trouble. Okay, a little bit of trouble, but nothing major. I soon found myself at Diablo. He was no problem in Nightmare, so I was optimistic as long as my mercenary could find his way to the sweet spot where Diablo's lightning hose attack wouldn't hit him. I still set up a safety TP though, because you never know. My mercenary was not able to dodge the lightning hose attack and immediately went down. I continued the fight on my own though, since most of his attacks are pretty easy to dodge. I somehow even managed to dodge Diablo's Bone Prison spell. What even was that? I've never seen anything like that before. And a lot of potions and holy bolts later, the Lord of Terror went down. And then the final act of the entire game, Act 5 in Hell. For the first part of the act, I moved along one side of the map to avoid being swarmed by monsters while my mercenary did the heavy lifting. But it was starting to get very noticeable that my mercenary hadn't had his weapon upgraded in what felt like forever, still using the insight in a war scythe that I made for him in early Nightmare. But even though it was at a slow pace, we still made progress. I found an ethereal Grim Scythe and decided to try and roll sockets in the cube, hoping for 4 sockets for an upgrade. Unfortunately, it got 5. I also remembered that I had picked up a white ogre axe before and tried rolling sockets in that too, but that one got 3. Oh well, it was worth a shot. With some patience and careful positioning and then a Hail Mary, I managed to save Anya also in hell. Phew. I did have some nasty, time-consuming encounters on the way with elite monsters, but I managed to grind through all the way to the Ancients. This was going to be the real test, since I was probably not going to be able to deal any damage to them myself, just hoping that my healing would be enough to keep my mercenary alive. I prepared by storing a bunch of potions on the floor and began again by trying to separate them as in the previous difficulties. I managed to get 2 of them alone, but they dealt a lot of damage to my mercenary, so I had to feed him potions in addition to healing him with Holy Bolt. It seemed like it was going to work out though, as I steadily worn them down. That was until the Whirlwinder got low and teleported away. That completely messed up my positioning and I couldn't get my healing to land fast enough and Emilio fell. And without Emilio, I had no chance against the Ancients, so I reset. During the next few attempts, the Ancients either spawned with way too dangerous stats so Emilio died instantly, or I was not able to separate them in time. On attempt 6 or 7, I managed to separate 2 of them again. Neither of them seemed to have spawned with any too dangerous stats, and my mercenary was able to lock one of them into melee. That meant that the fight soon reached a steady state where my healing was enough to keep the mercenary alive while he slowly worn them down one by one. The first ancient fell after about 4.5 minutes. When fighting the second one, my mercenary took less damage, but thanks to the fight moving around, there was now a risk that I could miss with my healing holy bolts and the mercenary got scarily low a few times. The ancient even got in a few big hits on me, but after another 3 or 4 minutes, the second ancient fell as well. Then there was only the double thrower left, and I really hoped he hadn't spawned with any too crazy stats. He was extra strong, which can be really dangerous in some combinations, but his other stats weren't too dangerous, so it was manageable. A couple of minutes later, Emilio had defeated all 3 ancients of Mount Ariat. Well done, Emilio. The final attempt took about 10 minutes, but I spent over half an hour on the ancients in total with all the resets. Now I was just hoping I could make it through the Wellstone Keep safely, because I had not found a waypoint since the Crystalline Passage. The first level had Zealots and Hierophants, which were annoying to deal with, but not too dangerous, so I couldn't complain. The rest of the enemies were either undead or demons, so I managed to get to the next level without much trouble. The second level had Skeleton Mages, which I liked to see, and then Bats and Scarabs, which wasn't the best, but again not too dangerous, so it was doable with some patience. What I was really scared of was getting a level full of scary enemies like Claw Vipers or Moonlords. I honestly don't think I could have taken out Moonlords at all in our current state. Level 3 had Spectres, which was perfect, Hell Temptresses, okay good, and Undead Knights. Nice, this level was looking like it was going to be the easiest so far. Now if my luck would only take me through to the throne room safely, I would only have demons and undead standing between me and completing the challenge, since all the enemies in Bale's waves and Bale himself are either demons or undead. Going down the stairs, I saw more demons, more undead, but also Claw Vipers. The Vipers could be scary, but it seemed doable if I could just secure the door area. Fortunately, I didn't run into any elite packs at all on the final level, and with just a few enemies in the throne room itself, I had reached the second to last obstacle of the game, Bale's waves. The first wave was easy, just as expected. I also cleared the second wave from a distance without any trouble. The third wave took down my mercenary, but with some cheesy tactics I managed to clean them up on my own. The fourth wave melted my mercenary in an instant because I had the wrong aura active when they spawned on accident. On the second attempt we defeated them with the right aura equipped and some potion chugging. But the real test was the final wave. They immediately ganked my mercenary and chased me all the way back to the stairs. But that actually helped me out since it separated them, so I could take on just a few at a time. Even a few of them could take down my mercenary quickly, and their knockback could really mess up my healing. To top it all off, the last revive also used the last of my gold, so if my mercenary died again I would have to abort and go farm for gold. We eventually managed to clean up wave 5 though, and now all that was left was Bale himself. After the really tough challenges from the ancients to arriving here, this fight didn't feel like anything special. I kept just in range for my holy bolt to hit Bale, and he seemed to have a really difficult time deciding what to do at that range. And with my support, Emilio could also tank him really well. I had one close call, but we eventually defeated Bale on the first try with 0 deaths, and with that I had completed all difficulties of Diablo 2 without ever equipping a single piece of gear. The next time someone tries to argue that the Paladin is not overpowered, send them this video. I have some big plans for this character. The next step is to gear him up in some decent gear, since being completely gearless in hell is slightly suboptimal after all. If you like this style of challenge playthrough, here's another video where I beat Diablo 3 without weapons, and in that game everything scales of your weapon damage.